light within our hearts, light within our thoughts, light within our words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. With me today on the show I have my friend Xenia Grant, who is also a person with high-functioning autism like myself, and we wanted to offer some comments, insights perhaps, on autism in relation to gender. At one time, it seems to me, autism was widely perceived to be exclusively a man's condition. I read somewhere of a woman with high-functioning autism consulting with a psychologist, a professional psychologist, and being told that you couldn't have autism, you're a woman. That, as if it was exclusive to men, which is not the case.
No, and actually they still, in this day and age, say that there are 4 times more men who are on the autism spectrum than women, when it may be more 60-40, because women manifest autism differently, especially more what you call higher functioning, those who are able to speak more and don't have as many motor issues.
Okay. Do you feel that the ways that autistic women act or interact are more constant from one to the next than autism in men? Because it seems to me in men, autism can vary very widely from one person to the next.
Same with women on the spectrum. It just that when I say it manifests differently, males tend to act out a little bit more. Women, the girls or females, tend to be a little more introverted. Also, the interest may be slightly different, whereas the guys are much more into more of the mechanical things, whereas girls may be more into the animals and stories. Not necessarily always true. I mean, you get women who are interested in train schedules and computers and electronics, and you get...
Well, and of course, to make it even a little bit crazier, well, not crazier, but a little bit less predictable, to throw in orientation. That a gay autistic man and a straight autistic man will have pronounced differences. And I guess it's an open question whether a gay autistic man and a straight autistic woman have more in common than their other counterparts.
I'm not even sure, because some of us on the autism spectrum, not all of us, but a certain percentage of us, really identify as more neutral sexually than anything else. Not all of us, but a certain percentage of us.
I did have a clinical psychologist tell me once that it was his opinion that being autistic frequently or mostly resulted in being less sexual.
That can be a possibility. I do know that, speaking for myself, I have no sex drive. None. Never have it, and
I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to talk about that directly when I'm in ritual garb as Sister Who.
I don't know. Understood.
But I do know people who are described as autistic who have very healthy sex drives.
It depends on the person.
Interesting thing, though, from conversations with that person was that it was interpreted quite differently.
In what way? Fascinating.
It wasn't about... The body was simply the point of contact.
Yeah.
The focus was upon deeper connections.
Mm-hmm.
For this person, it was more about emotional and psychological interconnections than about physical ones.
Okay.
It wasn't about, to use a vernacular, getting off. It was about bonding with a person in the deepest of possible ways.
Okay.
Which I suppose would be consistent with autism's focus on thinking and deep thoughts. And it seems to me in general autism reaches for something below the surface, specifically because autism is related to the details instead of the generalities.
Also, you have to factor into sensory issues, sensory defensiveness, sensory
There are some
comfort.
autistic people who don't like to be touched.
Yes.
I saw a T-shirt once that was making fun of that point and said something to the effect of, let's all work together, but for heaven's sakes, don't expect us to hold hands because of the sensory issues. Something like that. But but again, for each person it's different, but which raises the question, if it's different for every single person, are we saying it's more different when you add gender, or just that it's one more difference on the spectrum?
I would think the latter, that it's just one more difference on the spectrum because it's so individual. I mean,
so really we can't even generalize and say that autistic women experience autism different than autistic men.
it depends on the person. I do know from, stuff that I read, women that I have talked to, that women get grossly underdiagnosed with other diagnoses like, schizoaffective or, neurotic.
So they're underdiagnosed for autism, and at the same time they're being diagnosed with things that they really don't have.
Exactly.
Because the particular clinician is looking for some explanation, which I guess relates to an article I read written by an Australian doctor who went through medical school and all that and got out and was shocked to discover that as much as 50% of the time his colleagues really didn't know what was wrong with their patients. They were just guessing. 50% of the time.
Wow, that's a very high percentage.
I found it astonishing, but on one hand, I would have to say, well, they have their valuable contribution to make too, but I would disagree strongly in saying that they were somehow more special or more important than anyone else.
And also you got to throw in the fact that autism is mainly behaviorally diagnosed rather than through a blood test or through, hormone test or glandular test or
we may or may not
EEG.
ever get to the point where we can, do gene mapping, for example, and determine it that way.
I mean, and you don't know which genes it is because there's more than one. It's so complex.
Well, yeah, then linking the genes to the specific brain functioning.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's at least 500 years down the road.
I
don't think I'll live to see it anyway.
It's very complex.
But coming back to the issue of gender and autism, I guess where I would see the main complications, and where even as myself I run into the most challenges in dealing with people, is their expectations. Specifically because society expects something completely different, traditionally anyway, from men or women. I think it's becoming less so, but it's still there to a significant degree. That certain things are expected of women, and certain things are expected of men. And if, whether it's by autism or whatever, if you can't satisfy those expectations, there's a problem. But I think, depending on the specific expectation, if society expects a woman to be able to handle, X, Y, Z, cooking, cleaning, babies, etc., real stereotypical stuff, and she can't, then society may say, well, then you can become a school teacher or a maid, or, there's already roles there. If, on the other hand, society expects a man to be a breadwinner and he can't because of his autism, I don't know that society really has anything to do with him.
I think
Do you disagree with that?
No, I totally agree. My experience is that I think for a man on a spectrum, I think it's a little bit harder because in some ways more is expected of the male sex. Whereas with the female, if you're a little bit eccentric, you're not viewed as dangerous and you're not viewed as criminal. But I think with a man on the spectrum, if you're a little bit eccentric, and they think there's something sexually wrong with you or criminally wrong with you, and that's just usually not the case.
It creates additional suspicion.
Yes, absolutely.
I wonder if that correlates to a greater societal expectation for men to have answers.
That is a possibility, and they expect men to lead. They expect men to, let's say, ask for a date. They expect Tarzan to ask Jane on a date rather than Jane asking Tarzan, what have you.
The few television depictions I've seen where they kind of reverse the roles, I found quite amusing. But I do agree. In general, that's the societal script that thankfully is changing, but perhaps not as fast as some of us would like.
Understood, and not only that, but also there's another expectation for people who are different, especially those with disabilities, not to express any sexuality or sexual preference at all. Expect us not to even be interested or knowledgeable of that area.
In a similar way, though, I think the societal hidden message, I mean, it's not exactly hidden, but it's one of those things that everybody knows, but nobody ever actually said, just because society has a way of kind of weaving it into your reality.
Yeah.
It seems that society really doesn't expect a man to experience his gender or sexuality in anything more than a superficial way. And so when a man starts talking about sexuality involving genuine love, everyone laughs because it seems totally out of character.
And I think with women the same thing. I mean, I think the expectations are, I'm going to use Tarzan and Jane again.
Okay.
They expect Tarzan to be, this tough guy, or more what we consider masculine, and Jane to be more feminine, when that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a number of straight couples that have very happy marriages, but the roles are all reversed.
Oh, yeah.
The wife is the breadwinner and the man is the nurturer.
Yeah, and I've seen that too, and a lot of people, and I've seen this, being involved in the autism stuff for the last 25, 26 years, people on the spectrum have kids and grandkids. They're daddies and mommies and grandmas and granddaddies.
Well, and hopefully they're not patronized.
I don't know.
I mean, in the sense of the parents saying to the grandkids, now, if Grandpa does something funny or if Grandma does something funny, just ignore it because they're just a little, off or different or something. And in that sense, creating this totally patronizing, devaluing perception of the grandparents?
I'm not sure, but I do know that people, that society hasn't come to grips that there are people on the autism spectrum who get married and have kids and grandkids.
Well, and there's very much a sense in which autism is, or being autistic is just another way of being part of the diverse spectrum of humanity.
Absolutely. And,
which I guess brings up the question of, in what sense is it truly a disability?
Well, that's why it can be viewed from a cultural perspective, because there are those of us who believe that autism is a culture, like deaf culture or Ethiopian culture or Russian culture, and that, there is a cultural aspect to being autistic.
Well, I would, having asked the question a moment ago, I would put out that, yes, it is a disability, but the definition of disability might have to be altered, because people hear the word disability and they seem to think in general that means you don't have ability, instead of interpreting that it means you have a different ability than the norm, and because society expects, requires, demands, rewards the norms so much, it is actually a disability to have to live among them.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Because, because some of us on the autism spectrum have abilities that those who aren't on the autism spectrum may not necessarily have. I mean, like, for instance, you talk about the attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of non-autistic people may not have that ability as much. I mean that that we notice things that others don't.
Mm-hmm. And that could be used to advantage.
Yes, absolutely.
Which I guess raises the question of whether autistics are more nurturing.
It depends on the person and the personality and how they were brought up and the environment they're in and the culture that they are from. You can't really generalize.
I think we generalize sometimes for conversation, but it's never a good practice if you want to find out what is really true about any specific person, group, or situation.
I mean, and not only that, but one of the things I've read about is, when I read about autism and dating,
Mm-hmm.
and when I read about, um, trying to, be in an intimate relationship, and there's more and more literature coming about that by people on the spectrum and by those who are not on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the interpersonal whatevers and a lot of the nonverbal stuff that me on the spectrum may miss.
Makes sense. I guess going back to the issue of gender, then it raises the question of whether autism is the issue or whether it's all the other issues that are difficult to integrate with autism.
Again, I would say that would depend on the person. With some people on the spectrum, like for instance, a lot of men on the spectrum are so interested in wanting a girlfriend. I see this a fair amount of time because society expects, Tarzan and Jane to eventually date. They're not thinking about maybe Tarzan doesn't want to date or Tarzan wants to look for another Tarzan or what have you.
One way or another, though, it comes down to taking whatever configure of gender and orientation one has and finding a sustainable pattern.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that needs to be taught is that all relationships take work. I think a lot of people, this is just based on my personal experience, especially males on the spectrum, they don't realize that women don't want to be treated as objects. Relationships take work, and it takes both sides working on it. I mean, was fortunate I was married for 3 years, and yes, subsequently divorced, but all relationships take work. I remember having to work on my marriage, and all relationships take work, and I don't think that's emphasized enough.
It makes good sense to me. I guess, to me, the big one would be the way other people's expectations shift.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when we're considering our relationship with other people, we also need to consider, in a very direct fashion, whether you want to call it having a dialogue with your reflection in the mirror or what, our own self-perception, the expectations we have of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
the ways that we define what's special, what's good, what's right, what's wrong. All of those things become weight for us to carry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Psychological weight.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially when you have societal expectations and you, I can't think of the word, but you pick them up and you expect that one may not be realistic.
Mm.
And our society doesn't understand that maybe it's okay to be single all your life.
And that's not necessarily a tragedy.
No.
I think I would rather not, but I know, given a choice between nothing and being with an abusive person,
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather have nothing. But for the moment, I'm hoping there's some better choice out there instead.
Understood. I mean, with me, I was fortunate to have been married to a wonderful man for 3 years, but rocks in the road, and we were divorced, and it's
Mm-hmm.
subject for another conversation. But I've met many men autistic men who are single, and they just have to have a girlfriend, and it's almost like an object to be desired. I have to have.
Well, I wouldn't even say almost like it. It is.
It is.
You're objectifying the other person. You're not relating to them as a holistic,
Yes.
thinking, feeling, multidimensional person. You're relating to them as the object that will satisfy your desire, and heaven forbid, but I think in some cases the perception that this person will solve all my problems.
Exactly it. I mean,
Nobody has the ability to do that for another person.
nor should they, nor should it be expected to. But our society puts that on people.
I guess the question then becomes, if you are rejecting what society has put on you and attempting to form your own sense of self with integrity and honesty and so forth, whether you will be able to find the strength to stand up and be yourself.
Some people have a hard time with that because a lot of times they don't want to be the person that they are. They want to be someone totally different.
But it seems to me with autism we can't be anyone but ourselves.
Understood, and I remember being told that you're the only you have.
Well, these are challenging things we're coming up with.
Understood.
The other thing I guess that must figure into it all is to what extent a person's identity is vested in their gender.
I know it depends. It depends on the individual. With me, not so much.
Yeah, because you look in the mirror and you see an asexual person.
Basically, yeah.
As an autistic gay man, I look in the mirror and there are expectations about how relationships are supposed to play out that have me wondering at times whether I'm a failure. I think every honest person, though, will tell you that there are times when I think I'm a failure and times when I think I'm succeeding. You know, it's always changing.
I feel the same way. I mean, as I said, I was married for 3 years and was divorced, and you have told me that you were married, and since, your ex lives in another state, and so, I mean, and I just think all relationships take work. And to me, I'm more interested in how do you work with the relationships?
Okay. How do you think a person with autism who's detail-oriented would work with a relationship?
Depends on who the other person is. And it depends on how compatible the personalities are.
Okay.
It depends on many different kinds of dynamics, family dynamics. I mean, because you have in-laws and you have aunts, you have uncles. It's not only the couple themselves, but you have,
And if any of them ever had to deal with the same issues, you might find a sense of camaraderie. But then again, if you're at odds with them over those issues, to me that spells estrangement.
And because working with relationships is complex anyway, you're just adding more complexity to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even to your own life, because things continue to change throughout life.
Oh yeah,
So what you can add to something now is not the same as you'll be able to add to them a year from now.
Oh, absolutely. And those who I know who are married and married for long periods of time, things change over time.
Mm-hmm.
Issues change over time. Situations change over time.
Well, as the one Greek philosopher put it, change is the only constant in the universe.
I mean, and Chinese have a saying, may you live an interesting life, and they didn't mean it as a compliment.
Which I guess brings us back to our central issue for this episode of gender, that when you have a gender identity within a particular culture that deals with life in certain ways, then along comes autism, and you may have to reverse the list and do everything in reverse order or even in a reverse way.
Yeah. I mean, because it could be that, that the woman may be a little more masculine, the guy may be a little more feminine, or there are other other complexities involved besides that. I mean,
I guess that's where we come back to saying, what does your gender mean to you?
and to me, you have to take it on individual by individual basis. I am not going to make any assumptions about anyone and their gender in the first place.
I think the only reason, and I wouldn't want it to be assumptions, I would want it to be simple, honest, unpretentious inquiry. But the only reason I would opt for more disclosure or outness or whatever you want to call it is so that you can get to learn, get to know that person well enough that if they ever experience a particular need, you can come help.
Yeah.
And that they have had sufficient conversation with you that they'll know when and how to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
In any case, we're almost out of time here. Do you have any final thoughts about autism and gender that you'd like our viewing audience to know, or questions you're wondering about?
No, just that it's going to come up especially if you're dealing with a younger person, it's going to come up. And that do not shy away from the tough questions.
Well, I guess that's a good note to end on.
Thank you.
Go forward with courage.
Igualmente.
Thank you for watching.